Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the very first episode of the Deep Six Podcast, coming to you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Steven Spivak, joined today by co-host Daniel Spivak. Dan, why don't you say hello?
Hello.
And of course, absent today from the debut episode is our third co-host, Mr. Matt Barnes. Matt had to go to Connecticut for a business trip, but hopefully he'll join us in the very near future.
We're thinking of you, buddy.
But welcome. Thank you for being here for the debut of the Deep Six Podcast. I know I'm excited. Dan, how about you? Are you excited to finally get this going?
Let's do it. I'm ready, man. Let's go.
It's been 2 months since we announced it.
It's been 2 long months.
Yeah, we announced it 2 months ago, give or take, on the Gods and Monsters podcast. Shout out to those guys.
These 2 men have been waiting so long to do this podcast, and now it's finally happening. Well, 3 men, but 2 of which are
2 today. But yeah, welcome to the Deep Six Podcast. This is a podcast that is basically going to be 3 guys, as Dan already said in this case of this episode, 2 guys sitting around bullshitting back and forth about comics, movies, music, sports, video games, everything kind of in the encompassing bubble of pop culture.
And if you think this is a serious production, you should see the way we have this set up right now. I'm telling you, we have microphones.
Hey, we're sitting in a studio right now. This is a studio.
We have microphones sitting on a little end table with boxes. It's pretty Jimmy rigged, as they like to say.
But hey,
it would make MacGyver.
It sounds good.
It would make MacGyver proud.
As long as it sounds good, that's what matters.
Does it sound good?
I don't
guess
know.
We'll find out in about an hour, won't we?
Let us know. We'll put a link to an email where you can contact us. Plus, we'll also have all of our Twitter information and Facebook and all that stuff. I'm sure you already know all about that. Of course, everything is at Deep Six Podcasts, spelled out one word. Dan, what were you going to say?
Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and maybe in a few months buy our T-shirts. Patent pending.
But yeah, so I'm sure you guys already know what this is, but who are we? I'm sure some of you know me from my time at...
I don't know you.
Oh, okay. Well, you're about
to
find out.
I don't know if we've met before we decided to sit down and record this podcast.
But some of you listening may know me from my time with Defiant Giant Productions and hosting their audio podcast, Defiant Giant Radio, as well as a co-host on their video podcast, DG Live, mainly in the topics of professional wrestling and comics.
Shout out to John Boyega, a.k.a. Ricky Nix.
But yeah, I'm Steven Spivak. I'm 26 years old. Will be 26 years old. I'm teetering.
Still got like 5 or 6 months there, buddy.
I'm teetering.
If we're gonna talk upcoming birthdays, I think I'm the one who gets the glory there.
Okay, well we'll get to you in a second. 25 years old. Excuse me. Was a show production student at Full Sail University. Unfortunately, had to move back to Pennsylvania due to a car accident and an injury, which has been well documented through my social media if you really care to know more about that. But yeah, I'm a lover of professional wrestling, have been for about 17 years. A lover of comic books. I have a collection that is estimated at a value of about $10,000.
Sell that shit. Let's make some money, man.
Yeah, I'm here to talk about anything and everything pop culture. So Dan, why don't you let them have a little idea of who you are?
Well, since we already made mention of it, my name's Dan. I am Steven's brother, in case you have yet to figure that one out. I don't know how you would have gone this long without knowing. And I am 23 years old, but I will be turning 24 in just about, as of recording this, 3 weeks, July 21st. So send me some happy birthday wishes. It would be much, much welcomed. But I graduated college last year. I went to Penn State. all 4 years up at University Park. Got a journalism degree. Working for a newspaper in South Jersey right now, just covering some high school sports, girls basketball, field hockey. Not the best stuff in the world, but hey, I got to start somewhere. I've always been a huge sports fan. If you ever want to talk sports, mainly Philadelphia sports, but any sports in general, any team, any player, except for like tennis. I don't know much about tennis.
Women's golf.
I probably know more about women's golf than I do about tennis. But tennis isn't bad. But anyway, if you ever want to have a conversation about sports, I'm your guy. Wrestling, I will talk wrestling pretty much 24/7, which is one of the reasons we started this podcast. I am a huge wrestling fan, been watching since 99 along with my brother. But just, I watch it way too much, and I have way too many opinions about it. So some of them you'll hear on future episodes of this podcast, I'm sure. I go to a lot of concerts in the Philly area. I watch way too much television, way too much movies. And a lot of this stuff I talk about on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter at @D_Spivak, that's Spivak, SPEVAK.
And of course, you can follow me on Twitter as well at Steven with a V _Spivak, SPEVAK. And of course, you can follow the Deep Six Podcast at Deep Six Podcast on Twitter.
You didn't have to spell out our last name again.
Shameless plugging everywhere. Sorry.
They could have rewinded this podcast like 20 seconds and gotten the same spelling. But either way, but yeah, if you ever want to talk anything, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, I know Breaking Bad's been over for a few years, but wrestling, music, whatever, hit me up on Twitter or hit me up on Facebook. I don't care. But yeah, that's kind of a quick little rundown about me. And I just started a job at Giant Food Stores, which is very interesting, but maybe we'll talk about that on a later behind-the-scenes episode of working at a grocery store.
I was hoping for a quick bio, not a full autobiography there, Dan.
Well, you asked me about myself, and I like to talk, so...
That is true. You do like to talk, and that's part of the reason I decided to have you on this podcast.
Another reason we have started a podcast.
But yeah, let's get into today's topic, and I think this is going to be a very interesting one. Conversation I was having earlier today with my girlfriend, Miss Amanda Cole. We were talking about Ghostbusters and the original Ghostbusters and the comparison to the new Ghostbusters that will be coming out in just about 2 weeks. And somehow it got brought up. I believe I brought it up about how I think if the original Ghostbusters was released today, I don't think it would have, or I would like to see how it would have gone over with audiences in the modern, internet age of everybody can voice their opinion, everybody can, see these footage and set photos, all this stuff. And I would like to see if a production like the original Ghostbusters was done today, how it would have been received. And I want to get Dan's opinion on that, and I want to branch out a little further upon that idea.
He wants to get Dan's opinion because for those of you that do not know, I am quite possibly the biggest Ghostbusters fan in the world. And Steven will disagree with me on that simply for the fact that I don't own all this Ghostbusters merchandise and everything. And that's simply because I don't have the money to support that habit. But I think I've seen the movie at least 60 times. I can quote it from heart. I'm staring at a little Egon and Slimer sitting on my dresser to the right of me.
Not to mention the Stay Puft Pillow Pet.
Stay Puft Pillow Pet that is currently sitting in the corner of my room. And I had a Ghostbusters phone lock screen for God knows how long. I don't currently have it because I switched phones
downstairs.
Recently. Ghostbusters shot glasses. So yeah, even though I don't have all these really cool, amazing Ghostbusters memorabilia, I do have a lot of really cool things. I am a huge, huge fan, and I have plenty of opinions about the new movie, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point.
But Dan, let me ask you, do you think that if today the original Ghostbusters came out, or if, say, July 15th is when the original Ghostbusters is coming out, and you're in this, 2016, do you think this movie would be as received as it was when it came out in, what was it, 84?
I'm pretty sure it was 84. Yes. No. Yes. Yeah. All right, maybe I don't know the year it came out off the top of my head. I'm still the biggest Ghostbusters
But
fan.
to the question.
So suck it, people listening that don't believe
But to the question, do you think the original Ghostbusters would be received as well as it? Well, it wasn't even truly well received when it originally was released anyway. But do you think it would wind up having this? I want to call it a cult following. I don't know what else to refer to it as. That it has now. If it was released today.
Well, my question to you would be, are we talking the incarnation of the film as it was? Now, obviously, special effects and everything would be a lot more upgraded because they've changed so much over the span of 30 plus years.
Okay, we're talking about basically the film. If it was
So say, like,
if it
the
was
special-
modern day special effects,
So essentially, the old actors, the old plot, the whole old thing, but
if
with, like,
this
if it
was
had-
1984 and we had computers and Twitter
No,
and internet and everybody could have a podcast
computers did exist.
and everybody could have but I mean the World Wide Web.
Yes.
Everybody's got a phone in their pocket
Well,
that
what I
can
was gonna
connect
say-
to the world
what
in
I
a
was
matter
gonna
of an
say-
instant.
Well, what I was going to say was, so we're essentially saying the old original film, but with, like, the special effects of what the new film is probably going to have.
I'm just saying.
Well, because there is a difference.
there
is a difference there.
My point that I'm trying to make is how I think that it would have been criticized just as much, if not more, than this remake is being criticized.
Well,
And because I think people are too far up their own asses, and everybody wants to be a critic, and everybody
let's hold
criticizes
on.
just because
Let's
it
hold
seems
on.
like the cool thing to do.
let's hold on. We kind of discussed this just between you and me the other day. And I'd still hold, and this is true whether you want to admit it or not. The whole reason this movie's getting flack, all right, not the whole reason. Most of the reason this movie's getting as big a flack as it is because it's called Ghostbusters. There is an original film that has, as was well documented, has a cult-like following, more than a cult-like following, has so much merchandise that's been made over the years. It's been re-released for multiple things. It had a drink named after it, cartoons, comic books, everything you can think of, video games, for years and years, and was billed as one of the best movies, one of at least a top 50 movie to come out of Hollywood ever. And it had an amazing cast, which at the time was red hot because Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Howard Ramis, that was like the prime of their careers, and they were big stars back then. And that was a big, big thing. You gotta, when you ask, would that original Ghostbusters be getting the same flack as this one, you have to remember, you're also saying that in a 2016 where a Ghostbusters that isn't already highly regarded does not exist. And that's something you have to disconnect from this question, because people would say, oh, this is a kind of a cool, fresh idea. And assuming Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and all them was in it, people would be like, yeah, these are big stars. I'd want to go see it. However, if we were to say the whole reason now that the one with Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy and all them is getting all this flack is because it's basically rebranded Ghostbusters for the sake of it just being rebranded Ghostbusters. And people
So do you think that's why it's getting so much criticism?
I think it's a big reason. I think
it feels like a money ploy.
It's like, for instance, you're a big Back to the Future fan.
True.
So let's say Robert Zemeckis or whoever the hell. I think
Robert Zemeckis, Bob Gale, Steven Spielberg.
So let's say that they wouldn't be making the film; they'd be signing off on it, basically, like Dan Aykroyd and all the guys that did it. But let's say they were going to make a new Back to the Future, and it was going to be a new character. There was going to be a new doc, and it was basically going to be like the original movie, except it was going to be in a different universe, not connected to the original films, and it was going to have jokes that are basically 2016, like as we've seen in just the trailers and the commercials for Ghostbusters, the whole, slapping the devil out of her and everything, which is not jokes that were made in the 80s. Those were not things, slapstick humor like that was not as big in the 80s. It was more dry humor and like, you know, Bill Murray style humor where he's like, yes, this man has no dick. Those were the kind of things that people thought were great because it was just, and that's the other thing. I'll get to that in a second, but back to my hypothetical. Let's say that they're making a Back to the Future film that is, you know, all that. You're immediately people are going to say this is not Back to the Future. Before the trailers, before anything, you could get a teaser that says, "Oh, Back to the Future coming 2017," and people are going to react simply for the fact that there was a popular franchise named Back to the Future and it's very highly regarded.
See, my thing is I'm rooted in the comic book world of things. So I'm used to, you know, things being shifted around constantly, if that makes sense. You know, I'm used to characters switching roles and things being retconned or things being added that aren't, you know, typically canon or dealing with alternate universes. And I don't think it would bother me as much as it's bothering everyone that's surrounding this Ghostbusters criticism. I think I would come at it with an open mind and I would say, hey, yeah, you know what? It's not the original, but it's not going to ruin the original.
Well, I'm not under the belief that it will ruin the original movie because I'm not that, like you mentioned earlier, stuck up my ass. I'm not as big of a Ghostbusters fan as I am. I know I can disconnect this film from any Ghostbusters film that's ever been made because it's not the same. It's 100% not the same movie. It's not the same timeline. It's not the same characters. It's, you know, it's just.
So wait, let me ask you a question. If this was a third film in the timeline of Ghostbusters 1 and 2, if this was Ghostbusters 3, and this was just, you know, the new Busters, you know, doing their thing, would it be any different?
In the way it's been received, maybe. I only say that for the fact that Dan Aykroyd and probably Bill Murray, even though for the longest time Bill wanted nothing to do with the third movie, and that's why it never happened. But he has decided he's going to cameo in this new one. But if you had the old characters of, you know, Winston and Stantz and Venkman, then yeah, I think people would have been a little bit more on board with it. And I have always thought, and if you've ever played Ghostbusters the video game, the one that came out in 2009, not the one that came out in 2010, the Slime Spectrum or whatever the hell that one was called, is awful. But I was, you know, the third movie I always thought a great premise for it was, and Dan Aykroyd's basically said this was the third movie, was kind of you had kind of trainees that they were kind of carrying on the legacy, kind of like Ghostbusters
so kind of like
school.
So kind of like if the third Ghostbusters was approached as the latest Star Wars film was, where it's basically the same film or same story, just kind of modernized, twisted around a little bit, associated with the original cast and the original story.
I think people would have reacted more positively to it in that case, and then I don't, you know. And as much as I haven't spoken out about the all-female cast because I honestly think it means nothing. I don't mean that in a sense of, oh, it's, you know, it doesn't mean nothing. It's awesome to let me get this out of the way. It's awesome to see a completely female lead in a Hollywood movie today, especially a woman of color. I know I'm getting on a soapbox here, but it's awesome to see that. You don't see that very often anymore. Of course, when Paul Feig, the guy who is directing this film, he made Bridesmaids and everything else, so he's used to doing that. But my whole thing is, it wouldn't have been, you know, it's... all right, I lost my train of thought. But going back to what we were saying, you know, I think a third movie would have been a little bit more well received. I don't necessarily think it would have gotten great reception, I guess I want to say, because I think you're always gonna have those people that hate it, and I think people still would have hated it because they would say like, well, why do we need a Ghostbusters sequel in 2016? But I think more people would have been excited with it had we gotten, you know, an extension of what we had in Ghostbusters 1 and 2.
I can't say I'm hard pressed to disagree with you, but yeah, I can see where you're coming from, and I agree with that. And I think the same would going back to your question about Back to the Future would be the same for me, in how I would approach that and be receptive to that. Um, of course, I'd be a little bit doubtful, but I think if it was like Marty McFly had a kid, and the kid stumbles into Doc Brown's, lab or whatever, and it becomes kind of that thing, I think I'd be okay with that. But then again, that's completely hypothetical.
I guess my other thing is, I mean, I really, really, really would have loved to have seen a third Ghostbusters film. I know this is kind of going off a little bit from what we were discussing. But I know that Bill Murray never wanted it to happen. I mean, Rick Moranis didn't really.
Well, real quick, let's
quote, unquote,
talk about Bill Murray for a second. Do you think Bill Murray kind of wants to get away from being the funny man?
No, I don't think he wants to be away from
I mean, we've
the
seen
funny
him
man,
in a lot of serious roles, but we've also seen him do some comedy lately. So I mean,
he doesn't want to get away from being the funny man because he's been in the Wes Anderson films and everything else, and he's done roles that are funny. I mean, if you've seen Grand Budapest Hotel, or I think he was in that, if I'm not mistaken.
He was in Moonrise Kingdom.
He was in Moonrise Kingdom, but he was not comedic in that. But no, I don't think. I think Bill Murray's thing was, and after Ghostbusters 2, I don't really blame him because Ghostbusters 2 was not well received. It still isn't. It's one that's, it's not a terrible movie, but it was a sequel that's just kind of like, it was a sequel for the sake of being a sequel, People.
It was a sequel because after the lull that Ghostbusters had in the box office, it kind of shot to that.
Well, I think it was
it
long
kind of
enough.
shot up.
I mean,
afterwards
I wasn't alive when those movies came out. I retroactively became a fan of them. But as far as I know, it was a few years. It was a few years after the original had come out. So who knows? I don't even know what the Ghostbusters reception was by that point. But it just wasn't. It wasn't a great film, but it wasn't bad. But it gave us an extension on the whole Bill Murray character. Now, but I think the whole thing was Bill just didn't want to do the Ghostbusters thing anymore. And I think a lot of it was just.
I don't think Bill Murray likes to get so hung up on characters as well.
I think he just wanted to do something else. I think he realized, okay, the ship has sailed. The second movie didn't do great. It wasn't a box office success by any means. So I think it was just a matter of, okay, let's just move on to something else. Like, I don't want to do this. And Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, who were the masterminds behind Ghostbusters, held on to this idea for the longest time. And as much as I hated to say it, even though I didn't think it was going to happen, even if this wasn't the case, but it could have, who knows. But when Harold Ramis died a few years ago, the idea of a third film ever happening died with it. There was no way they would have ever made a third film with the original Ghostbusters without him, especially when Bill Murray was not on board. There was no way you were just going to have, it was just, there was too many obstacles, and Harold Ramis was, like I said, one of the brains behind it, and it just wasn't going to happen without him.
Well, let me ask you a quick question. I know you said something about the video game almost seeming like a third film. I've not played the game. I don't know anything about the game, but one thing I do think I remember hearing was that Bill Murray didn't want to be involved with it. Is he the only one from the original cast that wasn't involved, or was he involved?
Wasn't involved with the new movie?
No, the video game.
Oh, I don't think he was. I'd have to look it up.
Because I know
it's
that
been a few years since I played it.
I know there's been situations where they've released Ghostbusters merchandise, and Bill Murray, because he doesn't care to be associated with it to a certain extent, will ask to have his likeness changed on the Venkman,
Oh, I'm sure.
Characters.
And see, the other thing with, where Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis were hanging on to it, more so Dan Aykroyd, because he was the one that basically wrote a lot of the script for the third one,
well,
which
it was
ended
kind
up
of
being
like
the video
his
game.
dynasty.
It was his child.
I would say that Ghostbusters is just about Dan Aykroyd's dynasty. I mean,
are you trying to say that that's his legacy?
Sure, yeah.
Well, I would say the Blues Brothers and
Well, I mean, I'm not saying
Blues
it's his
Brothers
entire legacy, but I think if you're going to sit there and be like, what do you know Dan Aykroyd from? It's either going to be Blues Brothers or,
or SNL.
well, aside from SNL,
Yeah,
because
but
we all know
yes,
these
you're
guys
right.
came from SNL. That's
You're
like
right.
saying, Chevy Chase. Where do you know Chevy Chase from? Vacation. I mean,
And no offense to Dan Aykroyd, I love Dan Aykroyd, but he held on to it for the longest time because it was his baby. That is what he wanted. He wrote the original movie. He wanted to have a big say, and he enjoyed it. And I don't give him.
do you think that's another reason this new film is coming under such criticism and such fire is because he didn't write it?
No, because he has been part of the production team. He's been they've asked for his input and everything, and I think some of his ideas are even in the film, and he's even cameoing in it. So no, I do not think that has anything to do with it. It might in like the hardcore Ghostbusters fan base that's like
The purists, the people who are like,
yeah,
this literally
like the
doesn't
people,
need to be here.
The people that would get pissed if it wasn't the original movie, regardless of what the hell it was.
Okay,
So maybe, but I don't think that has anything to do with it.
So let's go back a little bit and touch on, like I said before, basically brand, what's the word I'm looking for? Brand integrity. You said that you can disconnect this from the originals. Just like I said I would be able to disconnect, if they did a new Back to the Future. But do you think in society that the general public has the ability to completely separate the two?
You mean just anybody who's not like completely wrapped up? So you're saying someone who's not really like a big Ghostbusters fan, just like, oh, I know what Ghostbusters is.
No, there's like the people who are like, oh, you're shitting on my childhood. Oh, you're ruining my memories.
I think those people are batshit insane and need to step back off the ledge and realize, okay, not everything needs to be nostalgia. Those are the people that are just, I don't know. There was this one blogger.
See, this is part of the reason we're doing this podcast is because I think people are too far up their own asses about accepting, rejuvenating and putting new life into old franchises and kind of bringing them around for a newer generation.
See,
being too critical about things.
I'll get to that in a second because I want to address that point. But just like, for example, there was this blogger recently who he reviews films. I think he does vlogs on YouTube of them. And he flat out came out and said, I will not review Ghostbusters because I don't want it to ruin my childhood. And he got a lot of flack on the internet. Now, granted, it's the internet. I get it. But a lot of people on Twitter were basically saying, like, dude, grow the... Can I curse? Are we cool with cursing?
Go for it. Uncensored.
Grow the fuck up and stop pretending like you're some messiah when it comes to film reviews. Like, it's a movie. It's not that serious. As a ginormous Ghostbusters fan, it ain't gonna come close to ruining the franchise for me.
See, I'm kind of in the same boat there with the public responding to this vlogger you speak of. I don't think that movies, especially comedy movies, need to be extremely well written. They don't need to be completely cohesive story. And I think that's why, like, we went and saw Popstar just recently, you and I.
Which was fucking hilarious.
And there were parts in there that were literally just there to be funny. Like, there were things that were literally, like...
fucking hilarious.
Like, if you would have taken those specific scenes out of those films, or out of that film, you would never know that that's what that movie was.
That B scene, though.
Exactly. But that's kind of my point. Like,
go see this movie if you haven't yet.
I think comedy movies don't need to be,
and see, I don't
100% story driven, and they don't need to be, they don't need to look fantastic. If you go to the movie and you have fun, I think to me that's what matters the most.
And that I don't disagree with you, and that comes back to, again, if this was a movie that didn't have the Ghostbusters name or theme attached to it, people would probably love it. The same guy that has worked with a few of the same cast on Bridesmaids and stuff, people loved Bridesmaids. And I think this guy's perfectly capable of making
So if this was
great
literally
movie.
the same exact movie and it did not say Ghostbusters, if it
Not
was
the same
if it was,
exact movie.
if it was like a Ghostbusters parody movie, do you think it would
No,
get
people would
over it?
shit all over it. That's what I'm saying. In a universe where a highly regarded Ghostbusters film already exists, no, you cannot come out with something like this that's a parody or any of that. Now, had it been... See, that's the thing. Like, it's the Ghostbusters name that is giving this movie the flack. Because, and you
So
couldn't...
it's
and you
what
couldn't
comes
release,
with living up to that
And
that
you-
brand.
You couldn't... Yeah, basically. And
So
you
that comes
couldn't-
along the lines of this brand integrity and I
Not so
guess,
much brand integrity.
not integrity, but
But just what you come to expect from the
expectations,
Ghostbusters
I
brand.
guess. Yeah.
And I'll be honest...
But let me ask you this: there's been other things that have been done with the Ghostbusters name that aren't directly tied to the two films that people seem to like. Like, let's talk about the cartoon, The Real Ghostbusters, or the comic that has a team
Well,
that's
yeah,
not the original team.
but-
What about those things?
But remember when that came out?
It's not a
Remember-
movie either, though.
Well, yeah. Remember when the cartoons came out? They came out, what, late 80s, early 90s? They were on when we were super young, and I was born in 1992. You were born in 1991. So they were on when we were super young, if they were even still on at that point. And
so does that go back to the original discussion of it's not modern day society? It's not people saying, "Oh,
No,
it's not
no,
perfect.
no,
it's
not-
not this. It's not that."
not
Because
so
I think
much-
kind of goes the same for the Back to the Future cartoon.
Not so much modern day society, because I'm sure at some point
But there
when,
weren't it didn't
You
even
gotta
if there
remember-
were as many people who didn't care for it, there weren't enough ways to find out that people didn't care for it.
Well, yeah. That's
So
the
we don't
that's
necessarily know entirely how it was received,
That's the way of social media. Everybody can voice their opinion to
just like we're doing right now.
everybody can voice their opinion to the entire world for anybody to see in 140 characters on Twitter or in 17 paragraphs on Facebook or
Or in
on
an hour-long audio podcast on the internet,
or
like
some,
we're doing right
or
now.
some obscure Tumblr post or wherever the hell you want to post your opinion. You know, you could comment on a website. You could, anything. You didn't have this back in probably 89 or 1990 or 91 or any of that. So even if there was an outcry, not so much an outcry, but even if there was people that were against, say, the cartoon or whatever, it wasn't as vocal simply for the fact that you couldn't get your opinion out there like you can now.
So then in reality, do you think that the internet has ruined,
Ruined?
or not ruined,
Definitely not ruined.
kind of changed the entertainment industry?
Of course it has.
I mean, not so much in the fact that
That's a no-brainer.
I mean, not so much in the fact that it drives more content or whatnot, but more along the lines of the public and the fans having such a connection and the ability to be right there, Facebook Live video with the director of a film as it's happening, or on set of a movie.
I mean, of course it's changed. I mean, it's hard. You would be living under a rock if you tried to say that the internet and people's perceptions and opinions have not changed the way entertainment is. We see shows get canceled, not even just so much for ratings being bad, but people blasting them on the internet because it's bad. Shows like, let's take Game of Thrones, for instance. Game of Thrones is considered to be one of the best shows on television, but there are episodes where they get it bad and they get eaten alive on the internet. Now, does that necessarily change the direction of the show? Probably not, because it's usually an episode in the middle of a season that's already been filmed and whatever else. But nothing is safe from this public perception of...
What do you think that... Okay, then let me ask you this. Do you think that the studios and these creators not necessarily should disregard what fans are saying, but do you think sometimes they
No.
should kind of disconnect themselves a little bit and stay true to what they're doing rather than forming their product and their content around the public?
Well, I think this new Ghostbusters film is 100% that. Because they got flack for the all-women cast. They got flack for it not being the same universe. They got flack for it being a Ghostbusters film. And they continue to just say, fuck it. we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to do it how we want to do it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But this is how we wanted to do it. And I respect that 100%, that they were willing to do that they were willing to put all this public criticism aside and say, hey, we're still going to do this, and you can form your own opinion about it, whether you like it or not. And when the movie comes out, if it bombs at the box office and it gets terrible reviews and all that, then so be it. But that won't be people won't review the film based off the fact it was Ghostbusters. They might, but I think once the film comes out and people watch it, they will review it as a comedy film that is, they will be able to separate that entity, especially film reviewers, not so much fans. So if it bombs that way, that has nothing to do with the Ghostbusters. Okay, correction. It might have a little bit to do with the Ghostbusters lineage, I guess, so to speak, but it won't be. It'll bomb on its own, basically, if it's bad.
So let me ask you another question. This goes more along the lines of marketing and how a film gets received just from its marketing. Obviously, in today's day and age, we live in a world where if a big-time movie is coming out, almost a good chunk of it is released in trailers and TV, reels and
sadly
internet trailers and that was we've had this discussion. I've brought this up in podcasts I've done before. Civil War with Spider-Man. I think
my opinions on that. It was stupid to show him in a trailer.
I think they should have gone the Luke Skywalker route. We should have known he was going to be in the film.
I don't
we should
think
have
you
just waited for the film to come out to see it.
The only reason you should have known Spider-Man was going to be in Civil War was because you read a website that said, oh, the whole Sony bullshit with, all right, Marvel has the rights to put Spider-Man in these movies out.
Well,
that's the only reason you should have known. They should have never said anything. His name shouldn't have been on a poster. His likeness shouldn't have been used in any trailers.
I agree.
The director should have been like, no, he's not in it, and then boom.
No, I think coming out and saying Sony and Marvel have come to an agreement to allow Spider-Man to enter the MCU, and that Spider-Man's first appearance in the MCU will be in Civil War. That's all you needed to do. That's literally all you needed to do.
I still think that's too much. Just say, okay, Marvel has acquired the rights to use Spider-Man in the MCU.
Even more than that, how much stuff was shown in the trailers for that movie? I almost felt like I saw half the movie before I even went to see the movie.
I feel like a lot of the I guess the airport scene. I remember. I mean, I guess not, because I don't know. I don't really remember the trailers to that as much. I remember the film, but I can't remember what I saw
but
before the movie came out, as opposed to the whole Spider-Man reveal.
Let me bring it around then.
Wait, I don't want to go talking about Civil War. I want to.
But I'm bringing it back around to this Ghostbusters thing. If we haven't seen, I don't want to say we've seen a whole lot. We haven't seen a whole lot, but we've seen, I think, more than we've needed to see. Do you think if it would have been limited to basically that first trailer, maybe a second trailer with a little bit of extra footage, that there'd be as much criticism?
Yes.
Because I know there's a lot.
I don't think the footage they would have.
Well, there's also a lot of criticism based on the fact that we've seen that.
But see, the footage that we've seen was typical comedy 2016 trailer.
But I'm talking about like the special effects. People are complaining all the ghosts look the same. And I watched the original Ghostbusters today, and call me crazy, you didn't actually see a whole lot of ghosts.
Because they ain't afraid of no ghosts.
But I noticed there was a lot of things where they were like coming out of places, and they're like, oh, got him, and they show the trap smoking and all this stuff. I mean, think you see maybe
you see a
5 or 6
like
ghosts.
The Times Square scene that they show in the trailer and the commercials. You see, and yes, they all do look the same in that scene. And I just saw a commercial for it now that I didn't even realize the fucking Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is back in this movie.
Really?
But he looks different.
Well, then again, it's a different universe, and it's.
But he doesn't look like. I guess my whole thing is he looks like he's an apparition. He doesn't look like he's a big Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that's possessed.
I guess we're
gonna
have to
around.
see the movie to figure out what that's about. But I mean,
But I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
About how this kind of connects Ghostbusters to a new generation. And I'll bring up my nephew Aiden. He is 5 years old. And he knows I'm a big Ghostbusters fan. He didn't know what Ghostbusters was until recently.
he's a big Ghostbusters fan.
Well, he found it on his. He has Comcast, and they have the remote control that you can speak into. So one day he just said Ghostbusters into the remote, and it came up on demand on a free, I guess, on HBO or something like that. He watched it with his mother. He loved it. I got a phone call from him saying, Uncle Dan, I watched Ghostbusters. It was awesome. And then I was being asked for oh, how many movies are there? Can I watch the second one? And then my sister thought there was a third one. She's like, do you have the third one on DVD? We need to watch it. And I explained to her all this stuff. And something I've really kind of come to, not so much grips with, but something I've kind of said like, oh, this is cool. With the new Ghostbusters film, I can take my nephew, my 5-year-old nephew, or my 12-year-old nephew, or my 8-year-old nephew, or my 7-year-old niece to the movies, and show them like, look, this is what Ghostbusters kind of is, without having to sit them down and watch the old film with them. And I think that's really cool because I think there is
the other thing is there's a lot of innocence in that. There's a lot of innocence in being able to bring your kid to the film and being like, this is kind of what, this is what,
well, we talked about
Ghostbusters for you.
We talked
and
about,
I think kids also, a kid's gonna go see this movie and love it. But then again, kids aren't adults, don't have, complete access to the internet in most cases.
We can't
don't have podcasts, don't have Twitter accounts.
Well, we can't disconnect ourselves from the fact that we've already seen Ghostbusters.
Of course, it's also something that's instilled in us.
You're going to go in with that bias, whether or not you liked Ghostbusters. But I think I kind of tie it into, we were talking earlier about Star Wars, where all these parents were like, wow, I'm taking my kid who was the same age I was when episode 4 came out, and I'm taking them to the movie like my dad took me to see Star Wars when I was a kid. And I think that's awesome. Now, granted, I don't have kids. I wasn't alive when the original Ghostbusters came out, so I didn't see it in theaters. So that's not the same kind of situation for me. But I like that I could say, hey, I love this film. I have an incarnation. I can take my niece or my nephew to say, hey, look, this is something that I kind of grew up with in a sense and loved. Here, you can watch it too. And it's kind of bridging that generational gap. And then if they like the new one, or even if they have any interest in the new one, you could say, hey, there's an original film that this came out. And you can create a whole new generation of the original Ghostbusters fans out of this. So while, yes, some 45-year-old man is sitting in his basement complaining that this is ruining his childhood, I think you're creating a whole new generation of Ghostbusters fans for the future that will want to go back and say, hey, what was the original Ghostbusters? Or, hey, where did this idea come from? And I think that's great. And I think that is one of the things I do love about this film. It's one of the things I loved about the new Star Wars, even though I love the new Star Wars and I love Star Wars in general, and just things like that. I think that's cool. And I think that is one of the things that people need to kind of keep in mind when they're blowing up message boards about this damn thing.
And of course, this isn't necessarily a film that was made for, I don't want to say it wasn't made for Ghostbusters fans, but it wasn't made to be entirely for the original fans. This was something that was kind of, I think, made in the vein of, let's kind of bring a new fan base into this. Let's bring girls into this, because, not many girls are Ghostbusters fans, at least not many that I know. But let's bring a younger audience into this. Let's kind of, bring this back around so you can say, hey, you know what, you've seen this, but this is the Ghostbusters from my day. This is the original. This is the stuff, And
I think that's the important part. And I think people need to set aside their selfish beliefs that everything must stay in the sanctity of the Ghostbusters realm, and open up their minds to the fact that this is going to create more Ghostbusters fans, and it's not gonna alienate people. If it sucks and people don't like it, it's not gonna drive people away from the old franchise. It's just gonna only thing you can do is have fresh eyes on a new movie and say, all right, well, here you go.
Okay, so we're at about the 45-minute mark. I would like to kind of get to the point where if you're going to see the film or not, why or why not, before we get to the final wrap-up of the episode. So are you going to go and see the film? Well, wait, real quick, before we get to that, hold on. I want to say the other awesome thing about this film coming back is the merchandising surrounding it.
You're just so happy that Ecto Cooler is back.
Ecto Cooler is back. I've got 3 cases of it left.
Even though people like it, I think it's awesome that it's back, but people forget that they just changed the name of the drink and sold it under something else for the longest time. But it's cool.
It
it's
literally
cool.
hasn't been around since 2001.
I don't like that Slimer's not on the box.
I don't either. But speaking of Slimer, I mean, we went to Walmart the other day and we bought those little blind bag mystery figures.
The ones I'm currently staring at, I got Egon and Slimer. They look awesome.
And it's like, I think it's awesome to
see. $3, baby.
I think it's awesome to see, Ghostbusters merchandise in, not just the vein of the new movie, but the original films. And I think it's awesome to see, a plethora of merchandise at least coming out that's affordable. That's not, hey, let's go to the hobby store and pay $100 for a statue or something like that. A lot of stuff that was very expensive before, and that's stuff that was very affordable for the casual fan like yourself.
Plus, I work at Giant, and we have the lime green Twinkies, which is I didn't think I'd see them again. Because I know they released them a few years ago, way after the movie had come out. But yeah.
But I think
I wouldn't eat them anyway.
It's cool, and even if you're not a fan of what they're doing with this new release,
capitalism, man,
to see it,
make the
to
money.
See them also pay their respect in the fact that in the same scale that you're getting the female Ghostbuster action figures, you're also getting the male Ghostbuster action figures. It's an even split. It's not we're pushing this new movie, so here you go.
I don't know if it's an even split.
It's even
because
enough.
I do have my concerns that they released more old school merchandise because they knew the new stuff wouldn't sell. I don't have numbers to back up my
I don't know.
I don't have numbers to back up my claim, so I'm not going to pretend like I know what I'm talking about right this second.
I've seen stuff that's kind of like cross-branded between the two, but then I've seen stuff that's female and or new and male original, and like they've got a proton pack, but that's cross generational, or they've got things that are like
in either film.
And but it's
and things
it's
like
marketed
that. Things like that are good because you can. Not so much old merchandise, but you can make things that people will be like, all right, I can associate this with both movies.
But when we were in Walmart the other day, they had the action figures, and they had, the male cast and the female cast. And everything kind of seemed split. And, I mean, there was your Stay Puffed plushies and your Slimer plushies and whatnot.
Yeah,
but it was
Slimer
all kind
and
of...
Stay Puffed are in the new film, so...
But it's like I said, it's a lot of stuff.
But nobody's going to associate that with the new film. I kind of get that. Yes,
it's a split, is my point.
All right, so
to the question I asked before, I had to interject that as it popped into my head. Are you going to go see the film?
Well, you are well aware of what we've already discussed about how I have pretty low expectations for the film as a whole. I don't think it's going to be good. I haven't laughed at anything in any of the trailers or any of the commercials.
And you don't think it's going to be good because you feel like it's a lot of safe humor?
No, I just don't find any of it funny. I don't find the whole, let's slap the devil out of Melissa McCarthy's character. It's whatever. It's been done 6,000 times in other comedy movies.
So you think it feels, so like you're saying, it basically feels like another... buddy comedy with the Ghostbusters name attached to it.
Yeah. It feels like a lazy comedy with jokes that have just been done before. That now,
but they might just be putting
the
previews.
I feel like it. But the previews are what are selling the movie.
I mean,
so
true.
If the previews and the trailers suck, I have no interest to go see it. Just because it has a Ghostbusters name does not mean I'm going to go see it.
That's very true.
That doesn't mean I won't go see it. That's not the reason I won't go see it. I won't go see it because I have no interest in it. I didn't go see freaking the World of Warcraft movie because I had no interest in it. I didn't think it looked good to me. It has nothing to do with.
So you're
anything.
You're not basing it based off the fact that it's a Ghostbusters film. You're
No.
basing it off the fact that just because of what you've seen, it doesn't look appealing to you.
I've seen Bridesmaids. Bridesmaids was funny, and I only say that because it's this couple of the same characters or actors, excuse me, and the same director. I've seen Bridesmaids. I thought Bridesmaids was funny. I don't think it's a movie that holds up and is continuously funny. I think some of the stuff is funny, but I think after a while it's kind of like, all right, I laughed at this the first time. I'm not going to laugh out loud at it again. But I've seen Melissa McCarthy movies. I've seen Spy, which Paul Feig works a lot with Melissa McCarthy. He's the one that does a lot of her singular comedy movies. So I've seen Spy. I've seen Identity Theft or Thief. I've seen these movies where she's the lead actress and she's doing it, and it's like cookie cutter, not same jokes, but the same,
but all basically the same vein.
Yeah, the same kind of idea, the same kind of lame humor, whatever.
Yeah, I kind of disagree.
I feel like that's carrying over into what I've seen in the Ghostbusters trailers and commercial spots and everything else so far.
See, I kind of disagree. I don't think the problems that I've seen with the comedy are coming from Melissa McCarthy.
No, not from. I'm not saying from Melissa McCarthy. I'm saying the writing and the style of the comedy. I'm not saying coming from her. I'm saying, but it's the same director. It's going to have similar traits regardless.
Has there been anything you've seen that interests you about it at all?
I mean, I do kind of like the idea that I do like the premise in the film that the ghost, although this isn't entirely different than when the gatekeeper and the keymaster took over Dana and Lewis, but I do like the idea that the ghost can possess humans, like we've seen like in the scene with Melissa McCarthy where she slaps the ghost out of her. I like that idea. I think that's cool. It's not entirely different from what we've seen, but it looks like they are kind of doing it in a different way because they're going to just take the human form. They're not going to turn them into these like demon dogs or like they did in the original. So I kind of like that idea. I think that is something that could be kind of a little bit of a fresh take, I guess, so to speak, on the idea of the Ghostbusters franchise. But as a whole, it hasn't piqued my interest enough to want to go see it. Early screenings have not gotten good reviews from what I've heard. It's expected to bomb at the box office. Nothing is making me excited to go see this film. Nothing.
So you won't even pay your $5 to go and see it on a Sunday morning?
I might go see it on a Sunday morning for super cheap at a local movie theater. Maybe.
You're not going to go out of your way to see it.
It's a hard maybe. Saying. I'm not going to go see it opening night. I'm not going to go see it in a primetime spot. I'm not going to. If my friends want to go out and see a movie on a Saturday night,
you're not going to pay IMAX to see it.
No, I'm not paying more than. I wouldn't pay more than $5 to go see it in theaters. I am more welcome to the idea of waiting for it to come to, and I honestly think it's going to bomb hard enough. And this, I really hate saying this, but I think it's going to bomb hard enough to a point where it's going to be on HBO and on demand in 5 months. Because a lot of the movies that do bomb, a lot of the Melissa McCarthy movies are that way. Not that they bomb at the box office, but a lot of them do end up on HBO within the year. I mean, Spy came out in 2015, and it's all over HBO recently. So I am more inclined to wait for it to come to an HBO, come to a Redbox, come to on demand, and watch it there, where I don't have to leave the comfort of my own home and I can turn it off if I want to. I don't have to waste the money on it. Not waste the money, but spend the money on it instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to change the channel.
So it's not something you need to immediately see, but you wouldn't be against seeing it.
No. I'll give it a chance. I've always said I would give it a chance.
Okay.
Whether or not that chance comes on July, whenever it comes out, is a different story.
15th.
Yeah, that's a different story.
Me personally, I would like to go see it. I want to be able to make my own judgment before everyone else sees it and be like, oh, it was so bad, or other people being like, it wasn't great, but it was okay. I want to be able to make my own judgment when I see the film. And I don't want to have to wait and see it and this, that, and the other thing. But it's not something I'm going to rush out to see. So, yeah. there you have it. I guess that's our look at what we think Ghostbusters is going to be like and our thoughts on this upcoming Ghostbusters film, as well as our thoughts on just, general criticism of films in the modern age. Before we leave, I'd like to give out our, social media information again. Dan, before I get to myself and all the Deep Six stuff, why don't you plug yourself? Where can people find you? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff you'd like to plug.
All right. Well, my Instagram and Twitter are both the same. They're at D_Spivak. That's, again, SPEVAK, not B as in boy, V as in Victor, AK. My Facebook, if you just search Dan Spivak, I'm sure I'll come up. If you go to the Deep Six Podcast Facebook, there's probably a link to me there.
Yep, there's definitely links to your Instagram and your Twitter.
I don't use Tumblr anymore, so I'm not going to link that. What else we got? It said Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
I guess that's about it for you, honestly.
I have a portfolio if you want to check out my journalism work, but I'm sure you don't. So, but it's on my Twitter, so you can find it on there.
And of course, you can find me just about everywhere. Steven_Spivak. Steven with a V. Spivak. SPEVAK. If we haven't driven that home enough yet.
B. V.
If we haven't
Get
driven
it right, derelicts.
home enough yet. And of course, everything, the Deep Six Podcast, can be found at deep6podcast.com, all spelled out one word. And of course, you'll find links to our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. The website is built on a Tumblr, but there's still a link to the Tumblr. And of course, you can find all of our links there for our social media. And yeah. And if you enjoyed this or you enjoy the idea of this show,
tell your friends.
Please tell your friends.
Tell your family. Tell your random Facebook acquaintances that you've never talked to outside of the 4 times you two talked in 2010 in high school. I don't give a shit who it is. Post it on your Facebook. Post it on your Twitter. Post a thing on your Instagram. I don't care. Just tell some people. If you enjoyed it. If you hated it, then I'm sorry. If you enjoyed it, please share it.
If you didn't like it, please let us know. And if you did like it, let us know. This is.
Let us know if you hated it too. Let us know what we could change that might make you like it.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is driven off of your feedback.
If you just want to say hi, say hi.
Yeah, we'd love to interact as well. We're more than open to having a conversation with you on any form of social media that we're on. But please, if you like this, please keep following it. Please share it. Please let your friends, your family, your dog, your aunt, your uncle, your cat, your parakeet, your gardener.
Our cat audience is going to go up really high in the next few days.
Like Dan said, just let people know.
I think our cat's been laying in there listening to us record this.
But on that note, I think we're going to call this another episode. Not another episode.
The first.
The first episode.
The very first.
Of the Deep Six Podcast. For Dan, the absent Matt, myself, Steven, I'd like to thank you for listening to the very first episode of the Deep Six Podcast. We'll see you next time.